I'm Benjamin with the Straight Fire Podcast, joined by Mr. Keith Anderson, who has written a book that's pertaining to the topic we are covering today on spiritual leadership. And I just wanted to introduce this book to y'all in case you haven't heard of it. And Mr. Anderson, why don't you go ahead and tell the audience about this resource that you've written?
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate the opportunity. It's the book is called Arise, Leading by the Book. And shout out to Joe Wells and Kaio Publications for picking that up and putting that out there. It was a really cool experience to get to do. And what I wanted to do, kind of the main emphasis of the book is that no matter where you go, there will always be a need for leadership, especially with the idea that leadership is service. And just to kind of frame that and give young people an opportunity to kind of study these different aspects of leadership. So each chapter is a different characteristic of leadership that I believe is important and essential in kind of a complete service leadership mindset. And each chapter takes that characteristic and examines that characteristic through the life of a specific person throughout the scriptures. And wanted to be a little bit different with some of those. I know, for example, we think of Job as an example of patience, and he absolutely is. But I chose Joseph. So we see throughout the life of Joseph in the Old Testament how he waited on God. Given all of the things that he was experiencing, and how that ultimately worked for not only his good but for God's glory. So all of these different characteristics, and I love talking about leadership with young people, getting them to think about others, getting them to think outside of themselves with that service leadership mindset. And I really have always loved character studies, really digging into the life of a specific character in the scriptures. So being able to put those together, and then of course the last chapter is about Jesus, because he is the perfect example of all of these aspects. So each chapter going through those characteristics in a character study from the scriptures, and questions at the end of each chapter. It's really well suited for a Bible class. It's really well suited for just independent study and things like that. And it's been a huge blessing to get to kind of see that out in the real world, and get some great feedback on it. And I hope it's helpful, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, and it's definitely been a blessing to be able to get to do that.
Okay, now switch to me. So tell me, where can we find this book for people to go and order? Or
yeah, the easiest place would be Amazon. Okay. As I think probably 85% of all book sales worldwide happen on Amazon. You can get it from the Kaio Publications website. That's Kaio Publications. So those two places, but really the most convenient, the easiest, and the most familiar would be on Amazon.
Great, sounds good. Well, we want to thank you for being here, and we want to thank you, the listener, for taking the time to listen to this. And we hope, as the podcast starts, you enjoy that as well. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And let's start the Straight Fire Podcast. Welcome into the Straight Fire Podcast. Now would be a great time to show your support for the podcast by leaving a 5-star review, liking the YouTube video, and leaving a comment. If you want to stay up to date with everything that we do, be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Now, welcome in to the Straight Fire Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Straight Fire Podcast, and it is a joy to have you. And oh my goodness, we are in the new studio. It's the old studio with a lot of new things and a lot of new toys for us to play with.
It basically feels new. I mean, pretty much.
But for those listening who are concerned, we played with these toys responsibly. Everything will be put back where it needs to go. And because we're sharing this podcast we're sharing this studio with another little podcast you may have heard of, Digging Deep. Maybe
little podcast
that maybe you've heard of. But yeah, so anything y'all want to say in the new studio? The first things,
I feel like now there's a lot of pressure on us.
Any momentous things you want to?
It looks so professional. I mean, we've been recording like a basement, an attic with a plastic table, waiting for this. But now it feels like there's a lot more pressure for us to actually like be good, because we have everything.
Well, if there was pressure on us, we failed out a long time ago.
Oh yeah, you're right.
This is true.
I'm trying to get back into the podcast mindset because I feel like it's been a while since we've done it, and it's been a while since we've really sat across each other with our mics where we want them and with everything where we want them, and it's gonna take me a second to get back.
The last time things looked this good was at GBN. For
Yeah,
sure.
I'm about to say like I got to get back in that GBN mindset. But yeah, we're back. How do we feel?
Feeling good.
Feel
Feeling good.
Landon,
Ready.
Glad to be here.
ready?
Only up.
Alrighty. Yeah. So with that, I mean, yeah, we say only up, but now we're up and it could come down.
Yeah, that's
so
the problem.
we could be recording back in the basement next week because we got thrown out.
They kick us off.
One and done, baby. Well, enjoy this one.
Well, yeah, I'm
This
gonna
is
say
gonna be
enjoy this one. If you haven't, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can see our beautiful studio. And yes, with the studio back, hopefully the short form content will be back as well,
It's kind of how the Straight Fire podcast.
and long form content might be back too.
Yeah, that's kind of how the Straight
Or
Fire
started.
Started.
Never really had long form.
Yeah,
content,
started.
so.
Yeah.
That's kind of how the Straight Fire podcast work. Just listen to every episode like it might be the last one.
Yeah,
'Cause you never
exactly.
know when there's
That's
gonna-
what I think.
You
Yeah.
never know when there's going to be.
You never know when you might get an episode every week. You never know when you might get an episode every month.
I mean, we're not promising another minute. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. So, I mean, I was about to say, we're not promising another minute, but that's exactly what you said, isn't it?
Sure.
We're
anybody.
also not promising another minute either. So, you just never know. With that being said, today's topic is going to be one that was a request. It was requested to me. And originally it was on elders and deacons. But I, being neither an elder nor a deacon, and Landon being a deacon. No, I'm kidding. Landon, nor Noah or Landon. Whew, try that 5 times fast. Nor Noah or Landon being an elder and a deacon. We decided to talk about spiritual leadership. Because while not everyone can be an elder or a deacon, what people always can be are good leaders. Right? And so jumping straight in to the questions on spiritual leadership. Question 1. Who gets to be a spiritual leader?
That's all
mean,
you.
Sorry, I wanted to let that silence just permeate for a second.
Sorry. I mean, really, everyone is called to be a leader in some form or fashion, right? We all have a responsibility over people, over things that God has blessed us with, right? You know, every parable of leadership that we have, everyone gets something. People get something to differing degrees, right? Everyone has different responsibilities and talents, but everyone is called to be leader, right? And I think too often people think, well, I don't really have that much influence over people, or I'm not good at this, or I can't do that. And they say, well, I'm not going to be a leader because I don't have the qualifications that I think are necessary, right? They don't read the Bible and say, this is what God commands me to do to be a leader, but they look at the worldly standards and say, hey, this is what worldly leaders look like, and I'm not one of them, so I can't be a leader, right? But what we're going to talk about in this podcast is how everyone can be a spiritual leader with what God has given them, right? Because if you don't think you can be a spiritual leader, then really you're doubting God's promise in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17.
Yeah, Landon, would you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, and when you break down what we're talking about, when we're going to talk about spiritual leadership, and you kind of said this in the introduction, is we're not talking specifically about elders and deacons, right? Because that there are some stipulations that go along with what that looks like. And that's not really what we're going to be dealing with today. Today is talking about in your life, what does that look like as a spiritual leader? And sometimes that's going to be in a friend group. Maybe that's with the team that I play sports with, in the classroom. What does that look like? And maybe even in the family. Not necessarily just the parents. You can be a leader in the family without being, you know, the dad, right? You know, we think of leader in the home and it's like the father, and that's absolutely true. But like, what does it look like in my life when I'm in leadership? You know, one of the interesting things about spiritual leadership is it's not something that you choose, you're called to do that. So when you ask who can be a spiritual leader, well, it's those that are called to be. And when you look at what it means to be a Christian, you find out that all of us are called to be leaders.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to add, if you want to be an influential Christian, you know, we need to be spiritual leaders in the church, right? Obviously, that's very important. I think that's where our minds go. We need to be spiritual leaders in the church and in our homes, right? In our environment. But also we need to be spiritual leaders in the world, right? When people are struggling and going through hard times, they're going to look to Christians, because as Christians, we should have a foundation that allows us, that supports us as we go through those difficult times that people in the world simply do not have,
Right.
right? And they are going to be looking to people who are in control of the situation. And then we're going to tell them, well, it's not really me, it's God that gives me that control, that gives me that peace to know I can go through whatever, right? So we are going to talk about being spiritual leaders in the church and in the home, but you have to be one in the world as well if you're really going to be what God wants you to be?
You know, there's kind of two kinds of leaders. There are appointed leaders, and those are your elders, your deacons, your fathers in your family, right? But then there are also, oh dear, not unappointed leaders, but I guess that would be the word, unappointed leaders. Paul was not appointed. No one looked at Paul and pointed at him and said, "Hey, you're a leader now." Paul just kind of took that role. Paul wasn't an elder or a deacon or a father for that matter. Mainly, he was an elder or deacon mainly because he wasn't a father. And also, I believe Paul probably wouldn't want to be so committed to one church, right? If that makes sense. But we look at Paul, and would anyone argue that Paul's not a leader? Well, absolutely not. And so it just kind of goes to show we are all called to be leaders, whether that be leaders, like Landon said, in our church, in our friend group, in our home, and wherever we find ourselves. Oftentimes, because of who you are and the God you serve, that alone qualifies you to lead, right? Especially if you are trying to serve Him as best you can. So when we talk about who gets to be a spiritual leader, the reality is kind of anyone who's willing to step to the plate, right? I was thinking about leadership, and there was this quote that I remember hearing, or not a quote, but more of an idea of everyone wants to be led. People want to be led. And I was thinking about that, and that made a lot of sense to me because a lot of times, we look out in the world and I see a lot of people who want to be leaders. We see, people who are vying for political roles. We see people who are vying for important business positions. And it feels like everyone's trying to vie for that leadership position. But those are kind of a loud minority, right? Vast majority of people, would want the simpler life of people telling me what to do. And that sounds bad, but that's, we go to work, and I go to work every day, and I'm thankful that I don't have to make like the decisions, right? I'm thankful that there's someone managing me and telling me where to go and what to do, right? And that's just kind of how life is, right? That's why we have elders, because not everyone can lead. And so I was thinking, it's a peace of mind to have good leaders. And that's what made me kind of think everyone doesn't just want leadership. Everyone wants good leadership. And that's kind of what we have to break down today is if everyone gets to be a spiritual leader, if you get to step to the plate, then how do I do the best possible job? But there is one more question I want to ask. Oh, and it's not on the sheet. Oh,
I wasn't even looking at the sheet.
Oh, yeah.
I knew you changed it.
Oh, it's just a deal. So how do we talk about, how do girls lead?
Oh,
Whether it be women.
I should have known we were going here.
Well, I feel like we talk about spiritual leadership, and it needs to be brought up. What do you mean? How dare I?
Landon will explain.
Make me go first. Oh no. So one of the most, okay, I'm going to start with a point, and then I'll get into that. One of the main things that involves spiritual leadership is actually the exact opposite of what is worldly leadership. Worldly leadership is, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to be the loudest one in the room, and you're going to do what I'm going to tell you to do because I'm the smartest person, or I'm the person that's going to get this done in the right way. You're taking the limelight for most of the time for the right cause. Like, I don't know a lot about politics, so I want someone who does, that is loud about that and knows a lot. I want them to take that light, and I want them to do what they've studied to do. Spiritual leadership's not like that. When you think about what spiritual leadership is, when you look in scripture, a lot of times Jesus shows spiritual leadership rather than being loud and blatant in it about yourself. It's rather humility and service, right? It's about serving, and that's what gets you to the point of being a leader. Jesus would say that in Mark, and he would talk about, the least among you will be the greatest. And what he was trying to show is this shift of idea that the Jews had a problem with, thinking that the higher up you were, the more extravagant you were in the people, whether that be the Pharisees, the Sadducees, or the council. Those were the leaders. And Jesus said, that's not leading, not spiritual leadership. Physically, yeah, they're leading you, but they're also taking it all to themselves, and it was never about them in the first place. They're taking away from God. If you're going to serve and if you're going to lead, you have to first serve. And that's what Jesus showed in his whole life. I mean, whether it be in John 13, when he washed the disciples' feet, he was showing that if I can wash your feet, then you can wash each other's, showing that you're going to be leaders someday. You can't lead if you can't serve. And so that's one of the most important things. And a quote, I'm going to be honest, this didn't originate with me. I think it was Eric Garner. He was doing a lesson one time, and he said, if service is below you, then leadership's above you. In other words, is if you're too good to serve, then you're not good enough to lead. And that's kind of this idea of service really isn't about taking, or leadership rather, about taking these major roles and it about being about you and what you can do and what you're going to do. It's not what it's about. And, that's true for what we talk about, these appointed roles, whether that be the elder. That's not something they're seeking out and they're wanting. That's something they're appointed because they've shown the kind of humility that they have, or the deacons, or even something like the minister. Those people are in the roles that they're in because they have this humility and they're giving this service. And so with that in mind, we flip and we talk about women. What does that look like being a spiritual leader? And I want to be very careful with how we go about this, because Scripture is very clear that men are the spiritual leaders in the home. Men are the spiritual leaders in the church. And some people are going to hear that and they're going to be like, whoa, Bible's not sexist. It's actually quite the opposite, but there's some things that have been said. When you go look at 1 Timothy, you look at Titus, an elder is to be the husband of one wife. A deacon is to be the husband of one wife, having faithful children. And so a woman can't be the husband of a wife. That's just not there. We've had a podcast on homosexuality. It doesn't exist. And so, not that homosexuality doesn't exist, but that this idea that you can do that, it doesn't work that way. And so I want to be very clear when we talk about spiritual leadership. I am in no means, and none of us are advocating that women can take on the roles of elders and deacons or ministers or song leaders or anything of that nature. Or am I saying that women are the leaders in the home? Because they're not. You go to Ephesians and you look at the husband as the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. And I'm saying all this because I want it to be very clear what I am saying versus what I'm not, which is becoming very important as this podcast starts to grow, that people understand what we aren't saying. And so before I say what I'm going to say, I'm not saying that women can take on leadership roles in the congregation as far as appointed roles, and I'm not saying that they're the leader in the home. And I'm going to flip that. I'm going to say there will be times where there will be a woman in the home that doesn't have a husband. And there's going to become scenarios in that, but that's a discussion for another time. But what does that look like? How can a woman be a leader? I'm going to use that in a very loose sense, but to go along with this idea of the topic, spiritually. And really what this is about is not about being loud. It's more about how can I be bringing people to what this is really about, and this is about Christ. Because what does a leader do? They lead you to something. That's really what all this is about. Whether you be the elder, the minister, the father, or just someone, like Noah said, being leaders in the world, all of this, a leader leads you to something. And in our whole life spiritual leading, we're leading you to Christ. And so what does that look like for the woman? I know I've taken a long time, so I'm going to make this kind of quick.
Keep going, buddy.
But I'm going to say, you've got all the time you want.
Yeah. It's an unusual amount of talking time for me at the beginning of the podcast. But what that can look like, and there's so many ways that this is true, but starting off with, I'm going to use the word generic in the sense that it's true for in the world. I'm going to let Noah go into that more in detail because I'm sure he's got more to say about what that looks like, being a leader in the world. That's equally true for you as a woman. That doesn't make it any less legitimate or any less purposeful if you're male or female. You're still going to be leading people spiritually to the truth in that sense. But, also when we talk about what that looks like for the woman, there's so many things that you can do. One of the best things that women can do is helping with children. And, I feel like this is kind of like the cop-out. People ask like, well, what if women can't lead in worship and they can't lead the church? Well, then what do they do? And I feel like we always are kind of like Bible class, but there's so much purity to that statement because women have a way with children that we as men do not have. God did not design us in the same way in that area. And it's true. They have an ability with them to help them grasp things so much better when they're younger. And that's a gift that God gave you. And I'm not going to say it's a leadership role in the sense that you say it, because when we talk about leadership, your mind goes to governors or spiritually elders. That's not always the case. So I'm going to use leadership in that sense, but it is. You're leading these kids to grow in their knowledge of Christ. That is the leadership, not in the sense that you think it, but it is. And that's an amazing way that they can do that. But equally flipping that to be true, you can help that in the church. no matter what their age is. You know, it says the older women are to teach the younger women. Paul would write that to Timothy, as the older men are to teach the younger men. And so whatever that looks like, there's so much dynamic to that, and it would take a long time. But in a lot of ways, it's the same for women as it is for men. Your example of who you are for Christians your age, for people that are younger and are one day going to become Christians, and those that it's going to take your example to one day become one as well.
I would say, I'm going to build on top of what Landon said, you know, when women ask, how can I be a leader, right? Because we spend the beginning of this podcast talking about how everyone is called to be a leader, right? And then, you know, it wouldn't be fair if we just spend the rest of the podcast focusing on men and how they can become elders and deacons. Women might not have the appointed roles that men have, right? That is God has given that to men to rule the church and to rule the homes. But what women do is they train those future leaders, right? They train those leaders on how to serve, right? Every elder, every deacon, every preacher was brought into this world by a woman, right? I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
There has podcast for another time. No, I'm kidding. We're all brought into women, and at some point we're all raised or taught by a woman, right? In most of the cases, not all of them, but in most of them, right? So women are training those future leaders, and I would say women probably, you know, arguably might have more influence over the younger generations than men do, right? They have more influence over those future elders, over those future deacons, right? They influence them in such a strong way, especially in the beginning of their lives. And what they do is they show them how to serve, right? They show them how to be submissive, but also how to be a strong spiritual leader in their own sense, right? I learned just as many spiritual lessons from my mom as I did my dad, right? My dad taught me how to be a spiritual leader in the church, right? But mom also taught me how to be a spiritual leader in the home, right? How to lead with service. That's what Landon was talking about. And again, the roles are different. And I'm not saying, you know, we're not down talking women by any means, right? We're not saying that they can only do this or that, right? But there are some things that only men can do, but women have such an extraordinary influence over the future of the church. They might have influence over more people than we will ever have influence over. And I think that should not be understated, and it cannot be overstated enough.
I would agree. And, you know, I wanted to bring up a verse here that if you're watching on YouTube, you saw me trying to find for a hot minute. But when Paul is writing to Titus about being a leader, and hey, you need because not only was Titus a leader, Titus was appointed, or Paul appointed Titus to appoint leaders, to appoint elders, right? And Paul tells Titus, hey, when you're talking about women's roles, he says this in Titus 2:2. Or excuse me, Titus 2. Let me get the right verse here, just to be sure that I hit the nail on the head. Titus 2:3. Excuse me. The older women likewise, that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. I mean, here's Paul telling Titus, everyone has a role. He writes to Titus about older men, older women, young men, young women, right? This idea of there is no one that is not responsible for how they act, right? And whether it's women teaching women or men teaching men and women, men teaching men, everyone has some kind of role. And Paul is very good about, especially when he's writing to Titus here, very good about making sure everyone realizes that there's work for them to do, right?
Yeah, and it's important to realize God is saying to women, it's not that you're not good enough to be elders or not good enough to be deacons. He's simply saying you're better suited, you know, taking care of the home, right? Or taking care of the children. Again, that's not diminishing women by any means, right? God is not saying that. He's simply putting everyone where they will do the best work.
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing wrong with women desiring to lead, right? They just have to find those right places to lead. There's nothing wrong with a man desiring to lead, but you have to find the right places for that. And that's what we're going to be talking about, is finding those right places for your leadership, right? Because everyone has influence over someone, right? And we need to be making sure we use that to the best of our ability.
Yeah. I mean, you know, men have as many pitfalls to leadership as women do, right? You put the wrong man in a leadership position, and it's gonna go downhill rapidly, right? And just that, go ahead.
But if women don't train their children, then we wouldn't really have much of a church.
we won't have any leaders. So yeah, everyone's responsible when it comes to leadership. Landon, were you gonna say something?
Oh no.
Okay, I'm gonna say I thought I looked over and saw you. So everyone is supposed to be a leader, right? That's what we looked at the first question. No, would you go ahead and read the second question? Well, because I accidentally lost it while I was searching.
I didn't. I
got it.
Like as
You-
I said,
you got it?
I got it.
As I said earlier, I did not have them pulled up.
I don't know where it went, but there it goes. Yeah, Landon, go ahead.
So the second question is, when should you decide to lead?
I don't know. I had that.
I like
in my-
asking the questions.
Benjamin, when should you decide?
I had that
All
in my
right,
mind,
Benjamin,
and then
this
I
is
lost
all
it.
yours.
Yeah. Okay. Here it is. Question 2: when should you decide to lead? Yeah. See, I like saying the questions.
No, it's my job now.
Doesn't it feel good to say the
We're
questions?
gonna have a vote in the comment section of the YouTube video. I'm taking over questions for now.
But then
I refuse the vote because we need Landon answering the questions.
yeah. Because
that's
do you
true.
really want Benjamin answering the
Yeah,
questions?
see, and there's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So when should you decide to lead? When people want you to. All right. Next question. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, but
I'm gonna let Noah go first. I talked a long time last time I went.
Obviously, there is talked about in scripture an age of accountability, right, where you become more aware of your actions and their consequences, right?
I'm so sorry. I was just thinking of when you're 5, you're not appointed a leader. Unless it's of other 5-year-olds, I suppose.
When you're 5, you're not gonna know. You might be a leader and you might lead other 5-year-olds to do other things, but you don't really know that's going on, right? But just as you get older, you're gonna get more and more responsibility, right? I mean, it's gonna come for different ages at all people. I can't just be like, yeah, once you're like 11 and 3 months, you're gonna get this responsibility to be a leader.
I have an idea.
Oh no.
When you are old enough to see leadership opportunities, you are old enough to lead.
Yeah. If you look at a situation and say, hey, I can be the person who steps up and do this, you should take it. But also, you need to be making sure you're not just looking for those opportunities to step up and take those responsibilities, but also to step down, right, and serve people. I would say if you're looking to start leading at whatever age, because some people might not know about spiritual leadership till later in life. The first thing you need to be looking for, right, is not stepping up into a leadership position, but stepping down into a servant's position, right? Because we see that's what Jesus did. Jesus never stepped up into a leadership role, right? He simply stepped down into a servant's role, always. Jesus washed the disciples' feet, right? And he talks about in John 13, like Landon mentioned, most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Right. And Jesus talks about how important it is to serve. And Jesus was serving people his whole life. That was his ministry, right, of serving people. And one of the greatest services, obviously, that he offered was showing people, hey, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repent. Right. And that's what we do, is we serve other people by showing them and telling them the truth. But if you're looking to start serving, and when can you start leading, is when you see those service opportunities. There's going to be little things that you can do to help your parents around the house that will help you start serving them. There's going to be little things you can do in the church to help your service for the church. But I would say take advantage of those opportunities to serve, and then you'll be given those opportunities to lead, right? No good leader sets out to lead. He is appointed to that position by those people who want him there. If you're looking to lead other people, then you're in it for the wrong reason, right? You should be looking to serve those people. I'm leading because I want the best for the people around me, right? Even if that means I do the harder work or I take less of the reward or whatever. If you're looking to lead at any age, be looking to help and serve the people around you.
Oh, is it my turn?
Oh yeah. I could have said, Landon, do you agree with that? But I assumed you did, so I was just.
Absolutely not.
I'm still waiting. One day.
That will be the day.
That will be the day.
Probably the last podcast.
Yeah.
I disagree.
The next is going to be like me, Noah, me, Landon, and someone else sitting in Noah's
you
chair.
see the thumbnail. Disagreement between Noah. No, I highly doubt that's going to happen. But when you think about what leadership is, and I like what Noah did in describing this, when you think about when are you ready, on 2 things. First off, interestingly enough, it's about growth, right? When you think about when Jesus sent out the disciples, he had prepared them beforehand. He wasn't just like, you're ready for this. Go. Like, you're appointed. You know, like, that's what you think. All right, now it's their time to go. He had trained them. He had taught them. He had made sure they were prepared for this. So you have to be ready. You have to be growing, which means you need to be studying. When we're talking about spiritual leadership, you need to be growing yourself. Don't focus on finding leadership. Like Noah said, focus on service and focus on yourself. Focus on getting yourself where you need to be, leading yourself where you need to go. Because if you can't get yourself where you need to be, you're not going to be able to get anybody else there. So work on yourself, get yourself where you need to be, study and grow. And when you go back to 2 Timothy and you look at the qualifications for elders and deacons, this is not the type of spiritual leadership we're talking about right now. But when you look at the qualifications that are involved in that, every single one of those qualifications should apply to every single Christian except for two. Those two being, you have to be married and you have to have kids, right? Those are not qualifications to be able to go to heaven. But the rest of those, being slow to anger, being patient, being apt to teach, meaning wanting to teach, being able to teach, being hospitable towards people, all of those things are things that you need to have anyway. And so when you think about when am I ready to lead, all of these things are things that you're working on yourself, right? When you look at all of those things that talks about being an elder, which is the greatest thing that you can do as a Christian is lead God's people. All of that is about fixing your relationship with yourself, fixing your relationship with people, and fixing your relationship with God. None of that is focusing on becoming a better, like leading people. Mm-hmm. It's about getting myself where I need to be so that I can go to heaven, so that I can influence other people to go to heaven, and so that I can be in heaven with the one that died for me. All of those things are about growing yourself. If you can't get yourself where you need to be, you're not going to get anyone else there. That's why Jesus was so strong in Scripture about defending your own soul. Right, you think about all of the things that he talks about. You know, if you don't love, you know, that one of the most shocking scriptures is if you don't hate your father and your mother, if you don't hate your brother and your sister, you're not worthy of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus wasn't saying that you need to hate your family and never talk to them. But what he was saying is you need to love your soul so much that if it came down to your physical relationship with your parents or your spiritual relationship with your Father in heaven, you pick your spiritual relationship. Jesus focused on getting yourself where you need to be. And so how do you know when you're ready to lead? Work on yourself. That's going to be something that you're always going to question. You can ask anyone that's gotten a leadership role. They were always like, I was just working on myself and helping other people, and it was there. I didn't seek out and be like, you know what? I want this. Now, there are people that desire to one day have a leadership role. You should have that desire. That will help you work on yourself more, but it shouldn't be something you should seek. You should work on yourself. And when you're working on yourself, like Noah said, help other people.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, why are Christians called to lead? Why do we even talk about spiritual leadership? Are Christians called to lead more than normal people? And what Landon said kind of made me realize, well, if Christians are striving to have these qualifications that these elders and deacons have, whether they plan to be elders or deacons, you know, whether that's on their, you know, agenda list or not. And let me go ahead and say, I think if you're a young man, you should plan to be an elder and a deacon. And I think if you're a young woman, you should plan to be the wife of an elder or a deacon, right? Don't marry a man for the young woman out there. Don't marry a man that you don't think could become an elder, right? And obviously, you know, that's a tough list, but I'm not, you know, who knows if I meet all those qualifications. I might have just disqualified myself.
On that
yeah,
one.
but that idea, but don't marry someone you don't think has the potential to become an elder or deacon or a spiritual leader, right? But that idea of if every Christian is striving to have those qualifications, well, Paul basically is telling us these are the qualifications of a leader, right? And so when Christians see those, people in the world are going to see those same characteristics, those same qualifications, and that's why you're going to be a leader, is because you've been focusing on being a leader your whole life. You know, you understand what true leadership is, and that true leadership is not telling people what to do, but rather showing people what to do, right? Often by example, right? Your leadership is service, right? And so that's just kind of, you know, you'll become a leader, and you know when to lead when you have the right mix of qualifications, and you have not the right mix. When you have the right qualifications, all of them, right, and you're striving to be better, not so you can lead people, but so that you can lead so you can lead yourself closer to God. But yeah, that's what I have for that question. I don't know if y'all have anything y'all want to say before we move on to question number 3. Landon?
I don't know how bad.
Okay. So question number 3, what are the consequences of being a bad leader? You know, I can go back in history and I can think of some pretty bad leaders, or actually some pretty good leaders that did some pretty bad things. You know, good leaders, a leader can either be just a bad leader, and you'll often not hear about bad leaders, or a good leader with a wrong agenda. Right? There's a lot of ways leadership can go wrong.
I would start by saying the consequences of being a bad leader is what's going to end up happening is, while you might get what you want and you might be exalted, everyone else around you is going to suffer. And that's how you can tell. I think that's one of the fruits of bad leadership, is when everyone else is suffering or everyone else is discontent. And if the leader is happy and no one else is happy, then that's not a good leader, right? Because really what should be the case is the leader should probably be more stressed out, more worried about everyone else, and everyone else should just be happy going along because they don't have to worry about anything because they have good leaders, right? That's not saying a good leader can't ever be happy, ever be carefree, right? But it is a mutual relationship of, I'm going to take care of the people who are following me, and I am going and make sure they have the very best. Right. And I think good leaders don't even view it as, these people aren't following me. They're simply allowing me to help them. Right. Yeah. And I think that's how we need to view it. And bad leadership is the exact opposite of that. Right. Where the leader seeks to put himself up first and have everyone look at him. But what he's really doing is he's hurting himself, and he's hurting his chances of ever being praised for being a good leader. That's really never going to happen if he doesn't start putting those other people first. So I think when you see discontent people, you know that there is a leader, someone who's leading, who's not doing a good job.
Landon, before you jump in real quick, I thought of an example, right? I was thinking there's examples of great biblical leaders, right? An example of a bad biblical leader, I was just thinking, is Rehoboam, right? What did Rehoboam want to do? Not listen to the wiser older men. He wanted to listen to his buddies, you know, and where the people were, like what you were saying, the people were discontent, right? The people came to him and saying, "Hey, this is not good. This is not working," and you know he ignored them, and ultimately the kingdom was torn in half because of his bad leadership, and that shows you what a bad leader looks like, what he talks like, and the consequences of that poor leadership. Landon.
Spiritual leadership. People aren't following you. You're helping them follow Christ. If you view your leadership spiritually any other way than that, that's bad leadership, because your focus is on you leading people and they're following Christ. You're helping them follow Christ. That's servitude. Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to call that spiritual leadership for the sake of the discussion, but it's really not. They're following Christ. Christ is the one that's leading. I'm just helping you follow Christ in whatever capacity that looks like. But I have 3 things, and they're really short on what that is, the 3 consequences. And the first one is you get accountability. You know, James writing James 3:1, this is what I'd open it up to. I had it in my notes, and I had no clue why James 3:1 was in it. But James says, you know, to teachers, you know, discussing watch what you teach, because teachers will receive a stricter judgment. Well, why is that the case? Why are teachers going to receive a stricter judgment? James is saying you're going to receive a stricter judgment because you're leading people, and that role of teaching, you're leading them in whatever direction it is. Whatever you're teaching is what they're going to listen to. You better be careful with that. So you have accountability. That's what James is showing, is you got to be careful with how you use your leadership. And so bad leadership, number one, that's going to mess with your accountability, because who are they going to look at when things go wrong? Who's God going to look at when things go wrong? It's going to look at you. It's the same way with elders. It's the same way with deacons. It's the same way with fathers. And it's the same way with me in whatever role that I'm serving, whether that be in my friend group, at work, or with my girlfriend, or whatever that looks like. If things are starting to go wrong spiritually, God's going to look at you. That's accountability. Secondly, it's going to affect whoever it is that you're helping. I'm going to say following, whoever's following you. But like I said, they're following Christ.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say following you for the sake of discussion. It's going to affect them. And so, however your leadership looks like the consequence, I start leading and it's about me, or I start making like Rehoboam, like he listens to the younger guys. Well, I'm gonna make things harder for you because that's gonna make you follow me. It affects people the way you lead, and so that's a consequence. And that's not always a bad consequence if you lead correctly. Because consequence we think of as a bad word. Consequence is just the action that takes place because of what you've done. There are good consequences that can take place. Bad leadership is going to produce bad consequences for the people that are following you. But lastly, and this one I think is the scariest consequence that can ever be because of bad leadership. You talked about bad leaders. This guy wasn't a bad leader. He just had some bad mess ups. That was David. He was a great leader.
Yeah.
I mean, a man after God's own heart. But when he sinned with Bathsheba, Nathan came in and he told the parable about, what you had done. And then after this rich man had killed the lamb, and if you haven't read that, you should go read it and then go read Psalm 51. But after he gives that, David realizes after the statement that you are the man, he sits back in his throne and he goes, God was watching. And so, but the interesting part of all of that is Nathan starts giving off all these things that are going to happen because of your actions. You're going to have war. You're never going to know peace. Your wives are going to do with what you did, except for they're not going to do it in private. All of these things are going to happen to you. And then David said, I have sinned. And Nathan's response is, God has forgiven you, because he knew the heart of David. But the most interesting thing is what he says after. And he says, but the son that Bathsheba has in her will die. You know why he said that? He said, because you have given occasion for the enemies to blaspheme God. Now you flip that. Why was this consequence happen to David? Because what he did gave occasion for God to be blasphemed. Bad spiritual leadership is going to hurt the church.
Yeah.
That is the most dangerous and the scariest thing that you have to consider when you think about bad leadership. Accountability, that's going to be on you. That's going to affect your soul. And when you think about how it's going to affect others, it's going to affect other people's souls. Those are serious things, because I talked about souls are the most important thing. We've had a podcast on souls, looking at people in an eternal perspective. But more than any of that, affecting my soul and affecting your souls, this affects the church that Jesus died for. That's some big stakes whenever you take on any leadership role. You think of the eldership, you're taking on the fact that if I mess this up, I'm giving occasion for people to blaspheme God. That's why elders are to be slow to anger and not able to give a reason for people to say, I know what you've done. That's equally true for every Christian, whatever role that looks like. If I start slipping this up and I start doing bad things in my leadership, I'm giving occasion for the enemies of God to blaspheme.
Real quick, Noah, oftentimes I think people like to remove responsibility of, I wasn't told to do this. Like, the person in the leadership role told me to do this, and it is their fault, right? And that can be true, right? David numbered the people in 1 Chronicles 21, and a lot of people died. And was it their fault at all? No, absolutely not. But unfortunately, bad leadership has consequences. However, a leader is most often just a reflection of the people he leads, right? Would you agree? No, I see you.
Yeah, I would say, I think, can I go on a limb here? What you're trying to say is the people will look like the leader.
Yes, but the people are responsible for electing the leader, right?
Very true.
So oftentimes the people will elect the leader that is what they view as the most like them, right? How many presidential campaigns do we see the whole theme of the campaign is, hey, elect me because I'm just like you guys, right? So we elect leaders that reflect ourselves, right? When the West Huntsville Church of Christ, where we attend, when they elect elders, we elect elders based on the fact of, or the elders elect new elders based on the fact of, they represent who we are as a church, right? They are the leaders. They decide what we do. But, if there was a new church electing elders, they would decide the best people to elect based on how they thought it was. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry if my brain flipped a switch. They would decide, if a new church was electing elders, they would decide which elders to elect based on how they think they should act. Right? Does that make sense? Are we tracking now?
Yes.
Okay, thank goodness. And so elders are going to reflect who that church is, right? Leaders reflect who the people who elected them are. So just because people are leading doesn't mean we still don't have responsibility to choose good leaders. Right.
Yeah.
No, you're going to add on to what Landon was going to say.
Yeah, everyone wants to be led. Yeah, I just want to add on top of what Landon said. I think Landon's right. That is the biggest responsibility we have as leaders and as Christians is to remember that how people see us is going to be how people see the church.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it kind of goes to what you were saying a little bit, talking about how people are going to assume the leaders and the people are the same. Right. But when people see us, they have to see the best side of Jesus Christ and his church. Right. And that's honestly the most important responsibility that we all have as Christians, is to let people see the light in us and make sure what we're showing is what we want people to see when they think of the church. But I was thinking about it, and one of the consequences that I don't think we immediately think of when we think of bad leadership, and one of the ways that we should avoid this is people doing nothing. Right. That is bad leadership, when people don't do anything. We talked at the very beginning of the podcast, everyone has a responsibility to lead. So if you think that you don't have a responsibility to lead, that's terrible leadership, right? And I think too often it creeps in. People like to come and sit in the pews and they don't think they have a responsibility to lead, right? They say, well, I can just sit here and be led. You should be a good follower, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be a leader, right? Because we're all called to be leaders. I like one of my favorite parables about leadership is Matthew 25 verses talking about the talents, verses 14 through 30, and starting in verse 16. Then he who had received 5 talents went and traded them and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 talents gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug his in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with him. So he who had received 5 came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over few things. I'll make you a ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also who had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over few things. I'll make you a ruler over many things. Then he who had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I know you to be a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But the Lord said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew where I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. Right, so this servant didn't do anything wrong, right? He didn't do anything that was bad. He just gave the master what he had given him.
Yeah, he didn't lose his money.
He didn't lose the money. No, he didn't gamble it away. He didn't spend it. He wasn't like the prodigal. He didn't spend it on tumultuous living, if you will. He simply gave the master back his money. So what's so wrong with that? Well, the master entrusted him with something and expected a return. God has entrusted each one of us with something, and he expects something in return. The 5-talent man was given much, so much was expected of him, right? The 2-talent man, he was only given 2 talents, right? But both the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man got the exact same response from God. You have all been given something, right? And what you do with what you have been given determines how good of a leader you are, right? Not everyone's going to be an elder. Not everyone's going to be a deacon. Not everyone's going to be given opportunities to lead hundreds of people, right? But we do have an opportunity to lead something. We do have an opportunity to be over something. Every single person does, whether it's your household, whether it's your children, whether it's the people in your life that aren't Christians. You have a responsibility to lead. And if we just sit on the sidelines and let Satan lead those people, then God's going to hold us accountable for that. Right. And I think we all need to be more mindful of the influence that we have in our own lives. Right. And remember, I was preaching this morning and I told everyone, you cannot stand still and be a Christian. The Christian faith is always described as a walk. Right. We're always moving forward. Right. And that's the same way with leadership. You always have a responsibility. There will never be a time where you can just sit on the sidelines and watch.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't have too much more to add to that. Landon, do you?
No.
I can't add much more than that. Always be moving and always be ready to lead, right? And I love those points. we want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Straight Fire Podcast. We hope that you are enjoying the new studio as much as we are. Go ahead and, if you haven't already, go ahead and leave a like, support the podcast any way you can. We are so appreciative for all the support and all the questions that you guys send in. Send in more. Like we said, this episode was a request. We've gotten a few more requests that are up on the table of consideration. I'll just call it that for, why not? But yeah, thank you all so much. We love the support you guys show, and we will see you guys in the next episode.